My name's Dr. Riley Elliot. I'm a shark scientist and I've been studying sharks all around the world for the past 15 years. But in most recent time, my specialty has been great white sharks in New Zealand, and understanding, more about this endangered, threatened, and obviously fear-inducing species. New Zealand's aggregation site at Stewart Island is in fact not Stewart Island. It's Edwards Island. It's one tiny little island off the main port of Stewart Island where these sharks aggregate. And previous historic effort by the Department of Conservation and NIWA scientists all around Stewart Island didn't reveal any other shark hotspots, only at Edwards Island. And these sharks didn't aggregate there because of us. They've likely been doing that for hundreds of millions of years. And the exact reason why they do it, is still a big question in science. And that's largely because it's not your classic seal colony, where seals are aggregating in the hundreds of thousands and showing predator avoidance strategies. No, you rarely see encounters between great whites and seals there. Edwards Island is theorized more so to be a social and potential mating aggregation site because of the size and the sexes of the sharks there. But it is a unique aggregation site. There's only about 5 or 6 of them in the world. And yet we haven't really been studying the sharks down there for over a decade. So the link between where these animals are pupping up in the North Island and where they're going potentially to mate and likely feed, are obviously 2 very important sites to understand. But right now, me personally, I'm the only shark scientist in this country really researching this, and I'm allowed to do it in the North Island, but I'm not allowed to in the South Island. Look, Stewart Island's had a very colourful past of great whites. They are a shark that creates, social conflict because of Jaws, the movie. And it's not ironic that it's always generally the middle-aged men, who are the ones who are hating on the sharks, because I guess they come from that vulnerable Jaws generation where a good shark was a dead shark. And they're the ones out on the fishing boats doing the fishing or the diving. But what was allowed to happen in the past in a place like Stewart Island, where people actively went out and killed sharks because they were afraid of them, is simply illegal now. But the frustrating thing about not being able to research down there, because the Department of Conservation feels they've done enough research, is that I know personally sharks have been killed down there for fear still. We know that fishermen with nets set them and accidentally catch great whites, and they know that if they leave a dead great white on the bottom, that the rest of the sharks vanish, and that can cripple the cage dive industry. And they did it this year, but proving that is very, very difficult. The only way in my eyes, which I've been proposing for over a decade, to avoid such conflict, which is based on human issues, but is affecting an endangered animal, is really to make Edwards Island, the area around it, a marine reserve, because that would avoid accidental bycatch by commercial set nets, which are put in a known and super rare aggregation site for this endangered animal. Yet, the Department of Conservation haven't done anything, and in fact, simply have stopped doing research down there because of a social conflict court case as to whether they could tell the cage dive operators what to do or not. And in my eyes, as a shark scientist, this is incredibly frustrating because it's always the way with sharks. The sharks always lose. And they have done nothing wrong but aggregated a site that they've visited likely for hundreds of millions of years. And the solution is so simple. And it's quite difficult when I'm permitted and allowed to study those sharks' babies up in the North Island, and yet I can't go connect their mothers and fathers, the missing links and the connections between these islands, without being able to do research down there. Again, it's human conflict overlapping and hurting the natural world. And you can feel the emotions in my eyes right now. It's almost bringing tears because, I don't know, they're amazing creatures. Anyone who sees them down there, the first instance, it changes your life. because it's like seeing a real live dinosaur. And these sharks have been around far longer than dinosaurs, so they actually are. The irony of the conflict surrounding cage diving, it's happened all around the world. In South Africa, it happened when it first started. In South Australia, it happened. And then in New Zealand, it happened, 15, 20 years ago when it first started here. And the answer was simple. There's science that proved cage diving could alter sharks' behavior for the adverse, but if managed properly, it wouldn't. And that is what the cage dive operators down in Stewart Island, were trying to implement, a sustainable means of tourism, which ironically and basically single-handedly has enabled great whites to come back, populations to thrive again, because they're worth far more alive than they are dead. When you go on these cage dive operations, it's like visiting a farmer. You realize how much these people care about the animals they work with. And it's a harsh environment. It's hard work. And they've gone through very expensive litigation measures to continue their work because they're passionate about protecting these animals, monitoring these animals. But they are so bootstrapped in what they should be able to do. Anywhere else in the world, scientists work on the boats with the cage dive operators because the tourists get more information from the scientists, and it's an ongoing funding platform to enable scientists to do monitoring research. But right now, there's nothing but water temperatures and photo ID being collected down there. And I was just down on those boats recently. I've got 20 satellite tags I could deploy, but I'm not allowed to. And it is just wasted information that could be assisting these populations because they are threatened still, even though they're protected. We know that they're being killed down there through human malice. But we also know that populations in the ocean are very vulnerable to climate change, to fishing pressures, to a lot of variables at the moment. The South Africa population, the most famous in the world, disappeared. And they don't know why. Because they stopped monitoring them. They fell into a period of thinking they knew it all. But the ocean is fluid, and unless you monitor it, you can literally lose an entire population. And we saw this year at Edwards Island that the sharks did vanish for 6 to 8 weeks. And that is a group of animals that for hundreds of millions of years have been going to a place to do something incredibly important to their population. And yet, because of the fear of them, they were displaced, which actually made them more opportunistic, potentially dangerous, and inhabiting areas that they don't naturally do. And I heard from local spearfishermen, snorkelers, that they were having increased encounters in areas they'd never seen these sharks before. Dead sharks have been known for quite some time to be an active deterrent, especially for their own species. And it makes sense. If you walked into a supermarket and saw a human dead on the ground, you're not going to hang around. And you're going to tell all the other people in there. And boom, you're gone. Sharks have a very sensitive and acute sense of smell. And when a shark is killed, they produce pheromones and chemicals of death. And if the animal is cut open, that releases that more actively. And it's also a huge indicator that that animal hasn't just been caught accidentally in a net and is intact, but has in fact been manipulated, which in itself is highly illegal. The fact that the agency that's legally responsible for these animals isn't doing anything is negligent. And I'm powerless. It just feels horrible, and finding the evidence of it is near impossible. But if that were to occur, that would make change. But the evidence is clear. You're allowed to accidentally catch one of these animals and kill it there, as long as you report it. So yeah, it's infuriating. And when these fishermen catch these, legally they have to report it to the Department of Conservation. They have to write it on a piece of paper, call them up and report it. But that's where the buck stops. So it's a flawed system. And it's illogical that we can commercially set these nets in areas where these sharks are aggregating. Especially when it's for malice. At the end of the day, if bycatch can be avoided, that is the solution, rather than trying to measure it. And right here at Stewart Island, at Edwards Island, it's so simple. Just create a marine reserve around this island because no one's fishing there anyway. Divers know there's sharks there. It's an aggregation spot and they don't dive for power there. There's thousands of kilometers of rocky coastline for butterfish fishermen to go set their net somewhere else. Why put it around this tiny island? It's so simple. These sharks, which have been there millions of years before humans have, should have their home protected. That's the bottom line. That solves all these problems. And science being applied to the cage diving operators down there will provide information to the locals who are misinformed about the risk of these animals and actually show that these killings of these sharks is actually increasing the risk to their water users that they think they're protecting. Department of Conservation did not issue me a permit down there because they said we've done enough research down there. The last research down there was over a decade ago, as far as I know. Technology has evolved a lot since then. We can very passively and non-invasively monitor where these sharks go, what they're doing, what habitat they're utilizing, and how that overlaps with us. That enables risk mitigation to them and to us. That enables fishermen to know where not to set nets, because they probably don't want to catch great white sharks unless you're the rare person who actively goes out there and tries to do such an act. It's a no-brainer. The fact that there is no science enabled down there is ridiculous, and I've in fact offered all of my tags to DOC for free and my services to give them all of that data, and yet it hasn't been picked up or any interest shown in it. The biggest hurdle generally in shark science is the money to fund the equipment. I've done that. It's sitting in my closet just there. Because at the end of the day, anyone who's gone and seen a great white shark in the flesh would fight for it, because their fear immediately does turn to fascination. And these sharks deserve it because they don't have a voice.